Today on the Lazy RPG Talk Show, we're going to look at last week's and next week's Sly Flourish article. I'm going to talk about room descriptions that we have available in the Lazy GM resource doc. There is a new Humble Bundle for DM Guild products for, I think, the first time. Dungeon Master Diaries had an awesome episode about playing online. I got to play some Daggerheart this past week, and I'm going to talk a little bit about my initial experiences having actually run Daggerheart at the table. Today's GM tip is rolling for monster targeting. And we're going to cover more questions from the Patreon Q&A, all today on the Lazy RPG Talk Show. I'm Mike Shea, your pal from Sly Flourish, here to talk about all things in tabletop role-playing games. So last week on Sly Flourish, I published the article, Track Turns the Shadowdark Way. You can find this on slyflourish.com. There's a link down in the show notes, and it talks about the value of keeping track of the characters and keeping track of turns and how you can put that in front of you regardless of what game you are running. Any RPG that you're running, it's a great way to kind of keep yourself grounded and connected to the characters in the game. You can find a link to that down in the show notes. Next week is the article, The Secret of the 8 Steps of Lazy GM Prep. What are the secrets? What are the secrets? What's the one secret about the step? I'm not going to tell you. You're going to have to read the article. If you want the article, check out, you'll find a link down in the show notes because it was published. But also, you should subscribe to the Sly Flourish newsletter. If you subscribe to the newsletter, you will have articles like this sent directly to your inbox each week. Also, for both of these articles, so both for Track Turns the Shadowdark Way and then next week for The Secret of the 8 Steps of Lazy Game Prep, I have my Readings and Reflections. Readings and Reflections is about a 10-minute podcast that I do for hero tier patrons of Sly Flourish, in which I read the article to you so you can listen to it in the car, but also talk about the article. Some of the ideas I had behind it, some of the other thoughts I had about it, some of the things that kind of led to me to write about the article. So it's sort of a behind the scenes in each of these articles. Really fun to do. And I think a good way to sort of get the director's commentary on the articles on Sly Flourish. And that is available to patrons of Sly Flourish, hero tier patrons of Sly Flourish. Get access to that. It is called Readings and Reflections. Some of the other stuff that patrons do, patrons give me a lot of freedom to be able to kind of work on stuff that I can then bring to everyone else. Because it's like a constant source of income that's coming in, it means that I can take significant time on activities that I can then give to both patrons, but also kind of put out in the open. Things like shows like this, right? The shows like this take a fair bit of time. They take a fair bit of money for the equipment and for the software and everything to kind of put them on. And I'm able to handle that because of the patrons of Sly Flourish are able to do it. But one of the examples is room descriptions. So one of the people, a couple, we've had this conversation in the Discord server, also available to patrons of Sly Flourish, about room descriptions for maps and things like that. And some questions have come up like, one of the people said, like, how do you come up with room descriptions so quickly for maps that don't have a lot of detail in them already, like Dyson logo maps? So an example, let's see, we'll bring one up down here in the lower. Another feature for patrons of Sly Flourish is the 5e artisanal database, but also the Dyson commercial map gallery. These are all of the maps that Dyson of DysonLogos.com puts out under a commercial license. And I have a gallery where you can download them. So you have a zip file with all of these maps in them so that you have them forever, but also a nice gallery, also runnable locally on your machine, where you can pull up various things. And we'll pull up an example. I think we'll just grab this guy here, right? So a question is like, well, how do you decide what this thing is? Like what exists in this map, right? They don't have any room descriptions in here. We don't know exactly what's there. So one of the thoughts, and there are some books that have this. I think actually the Tales of the Valiant Game Master's Guide has things like this. And I'm pretty sure the original 2014 Dungeon Master's Guide has this. I don't know if the 2024 one does. I don't believe it does. I'm not 100% sure. Which are lists of room descriptions for various types of lairs. So I wrote up a bunch of these. I wrote them up for Patreon. This was after the publication of the Lazy DM's Companion, or I would have put it in the Companion. It'd probably be out in a future book. And it is a list of common rooms by lair type. And this is available in the Lazy GM's resource document. So this is actually open and available to everybody, again, because of the patronage of the patrons of Sly Flourish. And it is also available under Creative Commons license. It's available under Creative Commons Attribution license, a very, very unrestricted license so that publishers can use this in their work. You can use these in digital products. You can use this in your own works. You are free to kind of copy these and use them how you will. And what I did is I came up with 15 common dungeon types. These include Beast Den, Castle, Caverns, Derelict Ship, Dragon's Lair, Forgotten Vaults, Manor, Mines, Necropolis, Prison, Sewers, Sunken Grotto, Thieves' Den, Unholy Temple, and Wizard's Lair. And for every one of those 15 lairs, I have 20 room descriptions. And the idea here is not that you directly fill them in, but they give you inspiration to think about what kind of rooms you might want for your tailored version of this map. So here, when we look at this particular map, and I obviously don't know exactly what kind of location we're talking about here, but I sense a couple. It could be either Forgotten Vaults would make sense, and maybe that's the one we'll pick. You could also do dungeon, right? That one of these is an actual dungeon. Which one? Or a prison, right? Could be another one. But I think we're going to go with the vaults, right? The Forgotten Vaults. And so these are mostly like, they have like ancient treasuries. And if you look at the thing here, you kind of got a different sets of things. Everything from false treasuries and true treasuries, living pillars, dead god's shrine, all kinds of stuff here. So in here, we could take a look and we could say, like, you could have a bunch of false treasuries in here and maybe only one true treasury and the other ones are sealed up. That one in the middle in the lower right, that could be your either like a devil's pentacle or a vampire sarcophagus or a lich's throne. This large one makes sense for either a dead god's shrine or a planar fissure, right? So you have this cut through here. What if that's like a planar rift that's going through the area? You could kind of fill that in. You could have draconic skeletons could be in this back chamber here. Like that makes sense for like a draconic skeleton that you could put here. These other ones could be shrines, right? We have like a shrine to a dead god. We could put a shrine to a dead god in one of these corners so that they could have even there. Godling's Cylinder is a fun one. That one I actually stole directly from the movie Prince of Darkness. So, the idea is if you know what kind of dungeon you're going to run and you can pick a map that lets you that sort of fits the theme, you can use these lists not as a direct like roll and put it on here. You could certainly do that if you want, but even better is using it as inspiration for you to think about the kind of chambers that would be in here so that you can sort of quickly jot down and then flavor them for your own story, flavor them for the campaign that you're running and the world that you're running, decide who those particular gods are and things like that. So this is a feature that's available to everybody, right? You can, and again, it's not only available to everyone to read, but also available for anyone to use in publishing. And that's this random chambers section of the Lazy GM resource document. You can find this, I will link to the Lazy GM resource document in the show notes below. You can also find it on Sly Flourish. I'm probably going to raise it a lot because I think it's right at the bottom. I have these Lazy GM resource documents and tools, including the resource document, the 5e Monster Builder document, which is the one that myself and Teos Abadia and Scott Fitzgerald Gray put out. And then we have a reference document multi-format, which includes Markdown, EPUB, HTML, JSON, etc. And then we have Lazy GM tools over on GitHub. So lots of different tools that are available for free and with open licenses so that you can use them for lots of things. But I wanted to show that off today because it is an example of the sort of, look at this. I forgot I had this, monument structures. That's cool. 100 different monuments. I forgot I had that. That's great. The resource document has lots of great stuff in there. So I wanted to show an example of the kind of stuff that patrons help me create that I'm then able to turn around and give to everyone, including publishers to use in their own products, tools, then tool developers to use in like their own random tools and tables. I certainly use them in the Lazy 5e and the 5e artisanal database, and usable for you to kind of quickly build out locations for your own games. This was interesting. We only saw this. I only got word of this yesterday. It's been a very slow news week, I noticed. There wasn't a lot of stuff that happened in the RPG space, which is fine, right? This is a 50-year hobby. There's not going to necessarily be massive news every single week. So that's totally cool. But one of the things that came up is, I think this is the first time there has been a Dungeon Master Guild Humble Bundle. I don't even know how they deliver this exactly. But many of the products that are in here are really, really good products built for the DM's Guild, which means they are actually able to tap into the intellectual property of Wizards of the Coast for the material that they have. For example, you can see a big Mind Flayer in this one from Call from the Deep, which is a cool, massive adventure done by JVC Parry. Home Field Advantage. These are all kind of top sellers. Many of them are top sellers on the DM's Guild. The Monster Loot, that one I'm not familiar with. The Haunt, certainly Uncaged. There are two different Uncaged volumes that are in here. Uncaged Volume 1 and Uncaged Goddesses, which are both in here. Xanathar's Lost Notes to Everything Else I think this was a DM Guild Adept product that was put on top of Xanathar's Guide to Everything when it came out. The Monster Manual Expandeds are very popular, as a very popular book, an Adamantine bestseller of additional stat blocks that go above and beyond the ones that were in the original 5.1 SRD and the original Monster Manual. Volo's Guide to Monster Loot is here. The Armorer's Handbook, making equipment to upgrade on a rune magic system. Savage Encounters, Villains and Lairs. Elminister's Candlekeep Companion. This is a very high quality product. I think they even had Ed Greenwood write pieces of this, if I recall. Durin's Guide to Tavern Keeping, another DM Guild Adept product. Again, lots of DM Guild Adept products that are in here. Taverns, Inns, and Tap Rooms. The Lost City of Mesro for the Tomb of Annihilation, and Uncaged Goddesses. So lots of different PDFs available, fully downloadable. You can download, you get the PDFs of them from the DM's Guild. And I don't know if they give you a key to the DM's Guild one, or they actually just throw the PDFs your way. I'm actually kind of curious how this actually gives them. I would do it, except I own almost every one of these. I think I own every single one of these, or almost every one of these products as well. So they might just be giving you license keys to them. But the license key lets you download the PDF. So you are getting the PDF, which I think is very important. 19 different items for $25. $25. As I have said many times in the past, the best deal on RPG products are Bundles of Holding and Humble Bundle. You get a tremendous amount of material for in this case, it's less than $2 a product. It's almost $1 a piece. It's like $1.20 per PDF. It is a really, really good deal. Even if you only use half of them, right? Even if you're only interested in half of the stuff that's here, it's still $2.50 for PDFs that in many cases cost $20 to $30. So really, really good deal. Check that out. That is the Dungeon Masters Guild Humble Bundle. You can find a link down in the show notes. Hey, my mom is here. Hi, Mom. Don't listen to that. If they said that I used a dirty word last time, don't listen to them. They're a bunch of liars. I don't know if you know that, but everybody on Twitch is a bunch of liars. So I'm told. Oh my God. I dropped the lid to my water bottle in the trash. I had to fish it out. Last week, I had a really good opportunity to hang out with the two folks running Dungeon Master Diaries, Matt and Jody, and had a really good time. And I have subscribed to I had already subscribed to their podcast. I think I picked it up. They asked me, they said, how'd you find out about us? And I said, I think it was when you guys did an interview with Kelsey Dion, and I liked that very much. And I enjoyed the thing very much and listened to it and really enjoyed it. So I don't remember if I reached out to them or we reached out through a third person to kind of get set up, but I finally got to talk with them. And we had a really good conversation, which I think will be coming out sometime in the future. I will certainly let folks know when it comes out, where we talked about sort of the difference between 5e and Shadowdark and 5e and old school kind of stuff. And I thought it was a really fun conversation. But I was also listening to an episode that they just did this past week about playing online. And I found it to be a really, really good encapsulation of running games online, what that means, how you do it, a lot of considerations for online play. There's a lot of great nerdy talk about microphones, which I really enjoy. I was oh man, I could totally sit and listen to a podcast about people talking about what kind of microphones and what kind of things they use. He had a really funny thing about how his noise gate was cutting off him making crow sounds, and he thought he was making these great crow sound effects. I'm spoiling, but these great crow sound effects, and no one could hear them, and it just all it did was make him look like a fool. It sounded really fun. Anyway, it was a really good episode for a really good podcast. You can find a link down in the show notes. That's a Dungeon Master Diaries. Really fun, focused on kind of old school gaming and Shadowdark, Shadowdark style gaming, but I think very interesting just to listen to from the whole hobby. So check that out. That is the Dungeon Master Diaries podcast. You can find a link down in the show notes. I got to play some Daggerheart this past week. My Wednesday game, normally getting together Wednesday nights, and normally we are playing our 3x5e game, but I had a whole bunch of cancellations for a whole bunch of different reasons. So we ended up canceling the game. And then Michelle and I asked Michelle, I said, how would you feel if we tried out Daggerheart? Would you be interested in trying out Daggerheart? She said, sure, let's try out Daggerheart. So I opened up the book and we started to dive in, and I used their one-shot scenario, which we're going to talk about a little bit, their one-shot builder, to build a quick scenario. And then the two of us kind of put together a couple of characters in the sort of duet way that I'm used to, which is we have like one or two different characters. And we put together some characters and we ran through a quick scenario on Wednesday night. Then last night, we also had some extra time. And I said, how would you like to continue our Shadowdark, or our Daggerheart? I'm going to get Shadowdark and Daggerheart mixed up. I'm very sorry. They sound almost identical. But if you ever hear me talking about Shadowdark, I mean Daggerheart for this particular segment. So Daggerheart. So I said, how would you like to continue our Daggerheart scenario? She said, sure. So I had done a little bit of prep on it based on the material that we had from the previous session. And we ran through the rest of our Daggerheart scenario. So probably on the outside, maybe 3 hours of gameplay. So very little, just touching upon it. But already I have big thoughts. And I thought it would be interesting, recognizing the fact that this is a very limited view of what my initial thoughts are. And then I hope to run a longer Daggerheart campaign. And then I can look back and say, how right was I about these things that kind of leapt up to me early on. I've done this also, like I look back at like what were my initial thoughts on 4th edition D&D, what were my initial thoughts on 5th edition D&D, and then looking back years later and saying like, how right was I? Like how close were those things? It's really kind of a fun thing to do. In some cases I'm close, in some cases I'm not, but it's really kind of interesting. So I wanted to talk about my initial Daggerheart thoughts. So my initial impression, I really liked it. Both Michelle and I really liked it. We thought it was a really, really good system. It was a lot of fun. I was able to kind of pick it up and run with it. I don't think I struggled heavily with anything. I mean, any more than I would with any system that I'm picking up. But there were a few things that really leapt out at me. I was like, wow, this is kind of different. And I think the number one thing that I'll bring up is how table friendly this game is, in a way that very few RPGs really are. I see a lot of different role-playing games. I buy a lot of different role-playing games. I've run a lot of different role-playing games. There's one kind of problem with a lot of role-playing games, which is the expectation that players are going to have a copy of the core book. And the problem with that is, particularly if you're only running a game for like 5 or 10 sessions, the idea that each player needs to have a copy of the book can be a problem. This is actually one of the advantages that something like D&D Beyond has, or some of the other digital tools that let you share the core book, is players can get access to all of that material because the GM can share it. So, but when there's a general expectation that like, if you're going to build characters, so an example is I have 13th Age, I want to run soon, and I have Shadow of the Weird Wizard, which I'm going to run soon. And I only have one copy. I don't even have a copy of 13th Age yet. I think the physical books are coming out, but I only have one copy of the Shadow of the Demon Lord Player's Guide. And we're going to have to do a couple of things. One is that I'm going to take the PDF and I'm going to put it on Google Docs and then block downloading, but let people be able to view it through Google Docs so they can actually view the PDF and see what's going on there. I am also, and then we can put that on a couple of tablets. I may actually end up buying like an extra copy of the Player's Guide, maybe 2 extra copies of the Player's Guide, so we can kind of rotate them through. But when you're building characters out, it's actually kind of tricky when there's a big expectation that you have the core book. This is something I don't know if they specifically had this design in mind when they did Daggerheart. You don't need the core book to build a character. So they have these really, really wonderful character-based or class-based character sheets that have pretty much all of the information on them that you need in order to build out a character. So here's an example of like the Bard character sheet, right? And the Bard character sheet already has things in it like the special thing you get with Hope, your rally. It has a whole description of like what the suggested traits are, suggested weapons, suggested armor, inventory, character descriptions. So you can fill out your character without having to go to the book. Now, the other big key with that is many of the character abilities are on character cards. So that when you buy the core book for Daggerheart, you get all of these cards with it. They're also downloadable versions of all of these cards. So if you needed more, you can get them and you can print them out for that character. These are the example of the printable character sheets that you could sort of cut and hand out to people if you needed them. But the core book comes with them, which means you don't really need to use the core book to make a character. And that means you really only need the one book at the table, the one book in the set of cards. The only time you're going to run into trouble is if you have two characters that are both trying to use the same sets of cards. And even then you could kind of hand them between them, or you could say like, okay, we're going to print off another set of cards for the player who's got it. That makes this game really accessible, right? It makes it really accessible at the table because you know that like characters and players can get involved in the game and make characters without having to dive into having their own copy of the core book. The copy of the core book that you have there, you can kind of share it around just to understand rules and things like that, but you don't really need it in order to make a character. That is a huge advantage in my mind that Daggerheart, I said I'm going to do it again, that Daggerheart has over a lot of other systems that I've seen, and it makes the bridge to get into the game and to get playing a lot smoother because you don't have to have this thing of like, how the hell are we going to share this copy of the core book with so many players, right? If you got a bunch of players around and everybody's making their characters, do you use digital tools? Do you share PDFs? Do you buy multiple copies of the core book and give them around? And I get it, like, the things are not always super expensive, but if you're trying a lot of different RPGs, the idea of getting your players who are not into these games as much as you are most of the time and tell them, oh, you're going to have to buy a copy of this core book. Now you're going to have to buy a copy of this other core book. Now you're going to have to buy another copy of this core book. I have a lot of GMs that are players, so they have a tendency of buying this stuff anyway. But you can see where like, oh, if you buy a system and it costs $50 and you try for 4 sessions, that doesn't sound like a really good deal. So that to me was kind of the big thing that I noticed is the physical design of the product makes it work really well at the table. Like it makes it really, you don't need to have multiple copies of the game in order to bring a bunch of players in. You can use these class-based character sheets to do it, to build characters very quickly. And it made character creation really fun and really easy. I enjoyed it a lot. So the threshold system, I'm kind of jumping down a list. None of these things are like high. That one was a big one for me, but none of these things are like higher or lower than the others. Or I'll kind of dive in and say like this mattered a lot, but a lot of this was sort of stream of conscious stuff that occurred. So the way that you handle things like armor class and hit points is very different in Daggerheart. Instead, and we'll look at the same character sheet I was looking at before. You have this idea of damage thresholds. Hit points are very low. In this case, when you start off, you only have 5 hit points. You have stress, you have evasion, and you have armor. That's a lot of different things, right? Evasion, armor, thresholds, hit point, and stress are all kind of like armor class and hit point sort of things, right? I guess you could kind of think of them like hit dice and hit points as well, but it's a lot of stuff. However, there's a reason why every one of these things exists. And once you get used to using them, they work really well. Evasion is essentially the target number that a monster has to hit, to roll in order to hit you at all. That's one. Then when the monster rolls down, we're going to assume that a monster is doing damage to a character. When a monster then does damage, the monster rolls the damage that they do, and it crosses over either no thresholds, 1 threshold, or 2 thresholds, right? You have these numbers, which is minor damage, major damage, and severe damage. If the damage crosses over a certain amount, that does like up to 2 points of damage, 2 hit points worth, or if it's really high, it does up to 3 hit points worth. What it does is it abstracts damage from hit points so that you don't have to track like 192 hit points and you took 36 damage. How many hit points do you have left? Instead, you have a small number of hit points and the damage just crosses thresholds, which means it's much easier to do the math. The same exists for monsters. When I was running monsters, they only had like 5 or 6 hit points. And as the damage would come in, I would keep track of, was that 1 point of damage, 2 points of damage, or 3 points of damage? And it was very easy to handle. I had talked about using like X's and slashes for tracking hit points for damage done to monsters. And I said, like, you don't even necessarily need to track the remainder if you don't want to. And people, some people don't like that fact and some people were good with it. But that's kind of what you're doing here is you're really only tracking like large amounts of damage at a time. And you're deciding, did it cross these certain thresholds before I even pay attention to it? Armor is your ability. Armor doesn't reduce the likelihood that you are hit. Instead, it gives you an option to take damage to your armor, which reduces the damage you're taking to yourself. Stress is sort of another currency that you can use both both to kind of fire off abilities. Sometimes you'll take damage to stress, but it's sort of another track of a resource that can be used to show the wear and tear on your character over time. It's a lot of different things, but again, once you get a hold of it, neither Michelle or I had a problem understanding how this stuff all worked, and we liked it a lot. So it felt fiddly, and it felt like there was a lot of stuff, but all of those specific things kind of made sense once we got in there. So one of the questions I had and I had heard, and I think Bob Worldbuilder did a video. I don't know if I watched it. Bob, love you. I might have missed one. I think Bob Worldbuilder did a video where he talked about Daggerheart, and he talked about how you have 5 states of success and failure on a roll from the player's perspective, right? When players roll, they roll 2d12. They add that together, and then they're trying to go to a target number. They add it together, they add any modifiers, and they go against the target number. So it's kind of the equivalent of rolling a d20 in a 5e system. Except you also have this idea of hope and fear. One of those dice is a hope die, one of those die is a fear die, and regardless of whether you succeed or fail, you could also succeed with hope or succeed with fear, or fail with hope and fail with fear. And it creates this sort of 4-stage system. But then you could also crit, and a crit does something else. So that means that there's really 5 states. And I think Bob's assessment that I had heard was that can burn you out quick as a GM who has to kind of improvise those things of the hope and fear. In the quick run that I had, it was not that big a deal, specifically because hope and fear not only is sort of a fail forward, yes and yes but kind of system, but also has a currency to it, which is the GM gets a hold of fear tokens, and players get to bring onto hope. They get to pick up elements of hope, which they can use for things. So what it meant is, even if you're having trouble kind of improvising what that stuff does, you don't have to improvise them all the time. Instead, you already know they're tied to a currency, so you can just worry about the currency. And then later on, you can decide that something was there. So Michelle, for example, tried to intimidate some kind of bandit folk that they had already knocked them down significantly. They weren't killed, but they had taken a lot of damage. And she said, get out of here. And so they said they were going to take off. And then she did like one last blast, and she missed, but she missed with fear. And I said, like, that meant one of them turned around and said, I'm going to see you again, and then ran off, right? And it was like a little story element of like, because she rolled with fear, that meant this guy's going to be a problem later. And I didn't even really have to hang on to that too tightly, but it was just sort of a thing I could throw out there that said, there's like a synergy. He's going to tell some bigger guy, he's got a bigger brother that's going to come back and beat him up, or, they're going to learn more about the characters because they got away, right? So there's little ways that you can do it that you can even sort of kick things off in the future rather than worrying about it right now. But in the 3 hours in our one-on-one game, I did not have a lot of problem worrying about whether or not I rolled with hope and rolled with fear, and how am I going to constantly, continually, creatively do that. Now, I think some GMs are just better at sort of improving with it, and I think maybe like if you sort of embrace this idea and try to dive into it, you can stretch that improv muscle that gives you this idea of what rolling with, success with hope, success with fear, failure with hope, failure with fear, and critical success, what those do. I think the more you run it, the more you'll be kind of on your feet, being able to kind of drop things in there. But you don't have to worry about it too much because the currency is there. So I like that. I like that as well. I really liked the cards. The whole idea, again, this because they use cards for classes and class abilities, it meant that not all of the players needed to have a copy of the core book. That is a huge deal. But it also felt really fun from like a 4th edition D&D sort of standpoint of having these cards in front of you. You have your loadout. The loadout really doesn't reach a point where it completely burns you out, so you don't have 36 cards in front of you. Even at the higher tier plays, you only have a limited number of cards. You have a wider range of options of things to pick from. But once you pick them, then when you're actually at the table, you don't have that many choices that you have to worry about. I think that's really cool. I think that for people who loved the sort of power system that 4th edition D&D had, this seems to fit that very well. You have like a card for your class, you have a card for your species, you have a card for your sort of background, and then you have individual cards for the specific domains that your background is tied to. So I really enjoyed that. One of the things on the character sheet that we noticed, and I'm going to give a minor complaint on the character sheet, was that they have this sort of inventory section here of things that you've got, but then on the back, that's sort of like you can choose. And really, I just circled it. I never bothered to write it down. If you want to do really quick character generation, you can just have them circle the stuff on the back instead of having to write it all in from the back to the front. So that worked really well. Then, of course, if you're playing longer, you can always put that in there. But that idea of like, I really like the idea of like just circle the things you need. And that kind of tells you, that sort of tells you what's going on. So I really, again, man, the character sheets are really, really good. So one of the things I love about Daggerheart, and I described it when I first did my spotlight on Daggerheart after having just kind of dug into the rule book a little bit, but I hadn't actually played it yet. But even now it's been reinforced. One of the things I really love about it is the juxtaposition between a game like Daggerheart and a game like Shadowdark, where they are such on extreme ends of the hobby. They're both fantasy role-playing games, but they both like treat what that game is like very differently. And I think one of, I often talk about myself being like firmly in the average of GMs and people that enjoy this hobby, right? Obviously I spend a lot of time on it. I write about it. So I'm not the average in a lot of things, but I'm just a gamer, like we're all just gamers. But one thing I think I bring to the hobby that is different than a lot of people that I talk to is I don't really have major preferences on systems. There aren't systems out there that I just don't like. And I know many, many players who just simply don't like one system over the other. When it comes to playing a game, I think I'd play just about everything. Right? I'd play everything from Morkborg on one side to Daggerheart on the other, or Pathfinder 2 on the other. I would play just about everything. From a GM standpoint, there are definitely games where I have a preference in my style of GMing. But when it comes to playing a game, I'll play just about everything. And what that means is when I look at games, I feel like I can appreciate what each game is bringing to the hobby overall, even though what they're bringing is very different from what other games are bringing. Again, you have that sort of Morkborg versus like Fate enhanced versus like Cypher system versus Shadowdark versus Daggerheart versus Pathfinder 2 versus D&D 5e. Like they all bring like a different angle on the hobby. And I think that's great. And I really admire all of them. I don't have a favorite. Like I don't have a style where I'm like, oh, I definitely prefer old school style to character focused style. But they do have a different theme. And there are players who definitely prefer one style over the other. And there are definitely GMs who prefer one style over the other. And definitely Daggerheart falls into this idea of a character-focused game where character background matters a lot, where players are involved in sort of building out elements of the world, which is very different from sort of the player challenge and exploration style of an old school style game. This is not at all, in any degree, an old school style game. It is a very modern, even calling them like the difference between old school and modern, like RuneQuest was not old, was made back then. But, so I don't think even old school really captures exactly what the style is. You could talk about like sort of a grim survival RPG, but I would say that the big difference is the idea of challenging players versus challenging characters, and that the characters are almost temporary interfaces between players and the environment in old school style games, where characters are really the focus of the game and character focused games, hence character focused games. Daggerheart, in my mind, is definitely a character-focused game. That's really the expectation. I think everything that you read throughout the core book, and certainly my experiences in playing 3 hours of it, was that it is definitely a more character-focused game, and I think that really works well. There are no because of the sort of character-focused nature, there are very few random tables for things inside the Daggerheart book. There is for loot. There are for certain things, but you won't see like a dungeon generator in there. You won't see something that's like has random encounters in there, right? I think there's generally a feeling that the GM is preparing stuff ahead of time that the characters are then going to connect with, more so than sort of the procedural generation that we would see in a game like Shadowdark, but also even in a game like D&D 5e, where there are random tables for a lot of things. And that was when I was sitting down and actually building out a scenario. I'm so used to having those kind of tools available to me, and not having those, I had to kind of shift my head around to get the idea of, okay, well, what does it mean for us to put together a scenario in Daggerheart? What is that like? That changed a lot in how I thought about the game. There is an encounter building system. The encounter building system is a little more difficult than something like the Lazy Encounter benchmark or like Tales of the Valiants benchmark. It's but I think it's something you can do in your head more so than the D&D 2024 encounter building system. Again, a little bit kind of tweaky, it's got some things and you're like, well, that sounds really complicated and weird, but really it wasn't so bad. And the way it works, so an aspect that I really like is that monsters are based on tier, and there are essentially 4 tiers. Tier 1 is level 1 characters. Tier 2 is 2nd, 3rd, and 4th level characters. Tier 3 is 5th, 6th, and 7th level characters. And tier 4 is 8th, 9th, and 10th level characters. So that's how you kind of break out the tiers. And then monsters are grouped by tier. They don't have a challenge rating. They're not down. They don't have a level that's specific to a character level. Instead, monsters are broken out by tier. Then if you want to figure out exactly what types of monsters should I have for what encounter, you actually don't have to worry about measuring their tier. You just know that tier 1 monsters are the monsters that are going to face 1st level characters, tier 2 for the 2nd through 4th, and so on. And instead, you only need to know about what kind of monsters and how many of them make sense given a situation or given a thing. And what they have is this thing called battle points. And the way battle points works is you multiply 3 times the number of PCs that are in combat and then add 2 to that. So I don't know why they put a parentheses around 3 times number of PCs plus 2, because when you multiply something, you do it before you would add anyway. But whatever. So for example, in the game that I ran, we were doing a tier 1 game, 1st level characters. That didn't matter actually, but we only had 2 characters, a character that I was playing, a character that Michelle was playing. So you multiply 3 times 2 plus 2, right? So 3 times 2 was 6, plus 2 is 8. So that meant I had 8 total battle points. And then you decide how you're going to spend your points. Now, the type of monster you drop in is going to have an effect on how many points you spend. Generally speaking, though, typical monsters account for 2 points. So that means you could have 4 typical monsters. Those monsters could be horde monsters, ranged monsters, skulk monsters, or standard adversaries, right? That's kind of because there are different monster types in here. So that made it pretty easy. And an example is I said they're wandering in the woods or wandering in the jungle, and they get attacked by some mosquito swarms, right? Giant mosquitoes. So here was a tier 1 horde. I knew they could face up to 4 hordes of giant mosquitoes. It was 8, which is exactly enough that it measured that benchmark. And then I could just run the giant mosquitoes. So the encounter building worked well. Again, I think you could, it seems a little tweaky, but I was pretty quickly I was able to get this in my head. Really only had to worry about minions, social support, they count for 1. Leaders, bruisers, and solos count for 3, 4, or 5 points. I bet you once you start running this game for a while, you don't really even have to look at this anymore. That you'll have an idea of that's a solo. Yeah, that's going to count for 5 points out of 8. So I'm not going to drop, I'm not going to drop more on it. But the interesting thing is the numbers don't really change as the characters get higher level because it's all broken down by tiers. So I really liked it. I thought that worked well. And I do think it's the kind of encounter building system that you can get in your head, and then you could quickly build encounters while you're running the game. I enjoyed that a lot. So one of the things I absolutely loved is that they had a one-shot builder that's in the book. And this is what I actually ran when I ran it for Michelle. I was like, okay, we're going to run a game. We're going to run it a Wednesday night. I had no time to prep. And they really built a one-shot thing intending for you to, have to build something very quickly. It is a single page called Running a One-Shot, and it has this kind of scenario of 3 sections. The prologue, which sort of sets things up, the adventure, which sort of clears, shows exactly what the adventure is, and then a GM prep session. And they have a bunch of different sort of options. So the prologue and the adventure, you're supposed to sit with your players and have them fill in the blanks. And the example says, our story takes place within the kingdom of 1. And 1 could be Altheria, Belsong, Helmrend, Rumari, Winter Sun, or Willowfell. In our game, we ended up with Willowfell. We are currently traveling through, and you could have Atlas, Dawn Hollow, Indigo Shadow, Rathmere, The Wonder. Best known for its massive spires, its sacred wards, the great tree, the mysterious powers that keep it afloat, or the shimmer that's hiding it. And then 4, and it could be blistering deserts, dark forests, dense jungles, or towering mountains. So it kind of gives you these options of that's where your initial setting is, right? And an example of what that looks like is, and this is how it ended up with ours. Our story takes place within the kingdom of Willowfell. We are currently traveling through Dawn Hollow, best known for the shimmer hiding it, and the dense jungle that surrounds it. After last night's attack by the Horde, many here have decided to leave. This morning we found out that the events of the previous evening woke a throng of spirits. To fix this, we'll need to enlist a tricksome fae. Our story begins as we prepare to leave the town of Wildfar, prepare to leave for the town of Wildfar, from where we might find what we're looking for. Right? So this was like a neat way to sort of build a scenario up quickly. I grabbed that, and then for the GM section, it says, okay, now, and it even says it in the book itself. It's like, okay, go take 15 minutes. Go tell them to go away for 15 minutes while you prep the rest of your section. And that had sort of 4 scenes, which said once the party leaves town, they find remnants of last night's events, something wild and dangerous, anonymous warning about their destination, or that they're being followed. As the parties journey towards their destination, they find something important, an unlikely ally joins them, a dangerous obstacle, and so on. So, and it has a bunch of those. And so when I followed through with that, it came to once the party leaves town, they find something wild and dangerous. And I said, giant mosquitoes. As the party journeys towards the destination, an unlikely ally joins them, and I said Dova the Goblin is going to join them. As the party reaches their objective, they discover someone has come to intercept them, and I said the Horde who wants the Fae to use them to control the spirits of the dead. A Horde shaman leads them. I actually ended up changing this, and I'll explain why. And then the third one was when the party finally finds what they came for, they learn it's not quite what they expected. Dova is the Fae, and seeks to be reunited with his lover Ilcilia. I changed that a little bit too. I did have it where it turned out that the goblin who had gone with them was actually going to the village because his long-lost love was there, and he really wanted the characters to help get him there so that he could meet his long-lost love. And they did, and Michelle really liked that. So that worked really well. So I ended up changing it anyway, but that little bit of prep gave me enough that I then did a lazy GM prep session for this campaign and came up with a quick thing. I did need to fill out some details of things like gods and regions and some other proper nouny sort of stuff, which I took right out of one of the campaign seeds that they had here. They have these campaign frameworks, and I ended up grabbing material from the Witherwild to kind of fill in some of the names of gods and some of the larger thing that was going on, which I did the second session. We played just the giant mosquito part first, and then we played the rest of it last night. And that one I expanded out by saying, here's some more sort of secrets and clues and other details of the area and what was going on here. That filled out the world even more, to the point where like we're now ready to kind of turn it into a real campaign. So I thought that worked really, really well. And I love that sort of one-shot idea, right? I love the sort of one page. Here's how you can fill it out. Here's what it's like to build a session, a very quick improv focused session for your group. And some people were like, God, that really doesn't feel like I'd have enough time. That would freak me out. And I'm like, look, I grabbed giant mosquitoes. Like, it wasn't like I did anything super special. They literally just fought some giant mosquitoes. And it was because my eye went straight to that monster when I opened up the monster section. There was no other like big thought. And that was enough. And then, I spent a little bit more time when I did the prep for the other parts, but then I ended up improvising in it anyway, right? I ended up changing a lot. One of the things that it had, one of the things I wanted to do when I ran it was like hang on to the things that made Daggerheart different from other RPGs. And one of the things that they have in here that people really like and really grabbed onto were these environments. And so environments, they're kind of like, and then people are going to say it, and they're kind of like skill challenges, but not really. When I looked at them, and I'll show the one that I used the Abandoned Grove, and this was the one that made me change a lot of the campaign. That for me, what this is it's sort of like a structured scenario or a structured scene. And GM, this is something I've learned having written Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master and talked to hundreds to thousands of game masters about it. By and large, not everybody, but by and large, GMs love structure. We want structure, right? We want paint by numbers. We want something that walks us through a process and just gets us from A to Z without having to think too hard. And I get it. It's because the game, RPGs are so wide open and so much stuff could happen that sometimes we feel like we're swimming in a black sea and with just shadowy monstrosities on the horizon, and we have no idea what to do. And I really feel like Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master, the value that it brings isn't so much in the specific steps that it offers, although I stand by those steps. It's that it offers a structure. It offers hey, here are the 8 steps. You follow the 8 steps and you're prepared for your game. And that alone that is a spoiler for the article that I was going to say. I didn't want to spoil earlier. That alone, knowing that you have that structure, knowing that you have this feeling for getting your hands around the game and feeling comfortable because you followed that structure, that's what people want. So when people look at this of like these sort of, and they call them environments, right? But really what they are is sort of like a structured scene, right? And in this one, it was the Abandoned Grove. And I said this kind of fits perfectly with the scenario that I was setting up, where the Abandoned Grove, it's a tier 1 exploration, so it's meant for tier 1 characters. Former druidic grove lying fallow and fully reclaimed by nature. Impulses draws in the curious echoes of the past. That's why you would want to go here. Difficulty 11, which means generally speaking, when they're rolling a check to see if they succeed, the difficulty for that is 11. They don't have DC, they have difficulties. Potential adversaries are things they might end up facing here. Right? Features, overgrown battlefields, and they can go in when characters wander and what do they find? And I ran this and it worked just fine. Barbed vines, that there's certain spots where they could get attacked by vines, so you could have some sort of environmental structures. You're not welcome here. Young Dryad, 2 Sylvan soldiers, and a number of minor treants equal to the number of PCs. Confront the party for their intrusion. What are the guardians concealing? What threat? I ran that scene and it worked well. And Defiler, I didn't do this. Oh, I did do this. It's a Defiler action to summon a minor chaos elemental drawn from the echoes of violence and discord. They appear within far range of a chosen PC and immediately take the spotlight. So in this case, I used what I did is I used this actually pretty thoroughly, and it worked well. The whole kind of second half of our scenario of our adventure was based on this, where I had them confront the Dryad. The Dryad was protecting the tricksome Fae, this kind of Fae queen, blocking anybody from seeing her, including Dova, who is her lover, and the characters, and said, and at first it was like they were really kind of nasty, but they didn't fight them, and instead they said, okay, if you want to meet him, there's an element of chaos that's here, and it's ruining this grove, and it's causing us a lot of problems, and I want you to go deal with it. And the characters said, sure. And then they went and faced that minor chaos elemental, and when they defeated that proved to the Dryad that yes, you're okay, you can go talk to him. And they talked to her, and then she said, yes, I'll soothe the spirits. She was half spirit herself. She could soothe the spirits of the town and kind of and be reunited with her lover. So that was really cool. And this idea of essentially, I don't know if they're all like this. I didn't read through every single one of them, but the idea that you sort of have this like encapsulated scene in here. And this is what people want skill challenges to be. It wasn't what skill challenges are. And that's why whenever people talk about how good skill challenges are, I always remind them that that's not what it was really like. Right? That wasn't what it was really like. This is much more open-ended. It means that the characters can address it in many different ways. It gives you a lot of prompts and ideas of things that you can throw in the way, but it isn't so refined and so structured that you can't share a really interesting story. It's giving you a lot of cool prompts. So this is actually kind of like a mini adventure scenario in it, right? Because this kind of, I think I ran an hour. I mean, I ran an hour for two of us, right? So I think I could have run a longer, an hour or 2 hours just off of the material that's in here. It's really almost like a tiny adventure that's put in here. So anyway, that was really interesting. There is one thing that I still don't really have my hand around, and I don't know how it's going to play out, that I wonder about, and that's initiative and turn order. In Daggerheart, there is no initiative. You just have players just jump in with what they're doing. Thinking about when I was listening to the Dungeon Master Diaries, where they were talking about online play, and the fellow who, I don't remember which one it was, that was talking about running Shadowdark online and said Shadowdark's turn order works really well for online games. And that clued me into the idea that Daggerheart's turn order may not work well for online games at all, because people have no indication of when they should keep quiet or when they should speak. So I think it's very easy to house rule some kind of turn-based system into Daggerheart so that you don't have people talking over each other the whole time. But I think Daggerheart's initiative system can definitely be a problem for quiet players who are just letting loud players talk all the time. And it's going to be I feel like it's going to be exasperated even in online play. The good news is it's really easy to house rule. In fact, Daggerheart itself has sort of a house rule sort of thing where you can put tokens in there. But I bet you, this is one of those weird bits where I bet you if you took the Shadowdark initiative system and put it into Daggerheart, I think it would work just fine. So that's one area, and it's a very commonly described issue or commonly described concern that people have with Daggerheart is the idea that there is no turn order during combat and that people are just kind of jumping in. Even with just two of us, when I would say like, what do you do? And Michelle's like, is it my turn? And I was like, there's no such thing. And she's like, I don't understand how that works. That's a confusing aspect. The good news is you could wrap this in anything. You could put Shadowdark style always in initiative. You could do a regular initiative if you wanted to. You could just do around the table, which I guess is really what Shadowdark's is. You could do Balsera style what they referred to as popcorn initiative, but I think it's called Balsera style, where each player, one person goes and then they say who goes next. And because you have monsters take the spotlight when they roll with fear, the GM can always drop in with monsters. So I actually think that Balsera style initiative, where essentially a player goes and at the end of their turn, they say who goes next. I saw Kevin Crawford had a thing where you actually decided who goes next before you did your turn. So the example would be like, let's say I have a group of people and Michelle jumps in. So Michelle says, I'm going to go. And she says, and when I'm done, Jay is going to go. And then she does her thing. And then Jay says, okay, and then I'm going to do, and then that gives him time to kind of listen to what's going on and decide what he's going to do. And then when it's his turn, he says, okay, now Joe's going to go after me. And then I'm going to do this. I think you could very easily put that in, and that would keep that sort of dynamic flow. Or Michelle could even say, I'm going to go. Does anybody want to go right after me? And someone can say, yeah, I will. And you say, okay, you go after me. And that way you have this sort of turn order that's going around where people are jumping back and forth. I think that could work really well too. I have a feeling the sort of free-flowing nature, even if while you're playing it ends up not being much of a stumbling block, which is possible because you don't roll initiative for roleplay scenes and you don't roll initiative for encounter scenes, except in case you're playing Shadowdark, but that Shadowdark always on initiative can actually help you with that. I think that even if it's not, I think people are stumbling on it just trying to understand how it works at all. That's the one aspect that I'm still kind of like, nervous about. But I don't think it actually can hurt the game at all because it's so easy to put other systems on top of it. It's a very easily house rulable thing on how to handle turn order. Because it doesn't have one, you could put pretty much any of them on top and it would work just fine. So those are my big thoughts about Daggerheart thus far. Having only played it for a couple of hours, I really liked it. I think the product design, maybe the best I've ever seen. Like, it's really good. Just in that idea of like bringing character and class-based character sheets that the players can build quickly. It has a very shallow curve for growth, but also it's a very crunchy game. It's definitely got a lot of different moving parts to it that I think can make it really engaging. So I really liked it a lot. I'm hoping to play more of it. I'm going to recommend it for one of my groups for us to play and play a longer. I'd like to play a 1 to 10 campaign in this. I think it'd be really fun. And then we'll take a look back and say like, okay, what did I like? So here, every so often they're not exactly house rules, but they're like things that I've been doing for so long, I don't even really think about them anymore. And this is one of them that it's something that I have now done for years, and I really like it. And I think it has some major sort of ramifications in our game, even though it's a very small thing that I do. And that thing is, I almost always roll to see who a monster is going to attack. I'm a big believer in rolling attacks in the open. I roll all my dice in the open. I don't use a GM screen. My dice are out there. It's very, very rare for me to fudge a die roll. And almost always it's because I really look at like the result and I'm like, this result is going to make this game suck. Like something is really going to go bad. And so I do it very, very infrequently. And it's very hard for me to do it because I roll in the open. So, but one of the things that I do is when we are running combat, I almost always have the monsters randomly determine who they're going to attack. This is antithetical to a lot of tactical game masters, or game masters who like to hang on to the tactical play of monsters. They like to think in the eyes of the monster, which is certainly a smart thing to do, and decide like it makes more sense for them to go after this person than this person. And there are certainly circumstances where that would be the case. And most of the time, for me, that is a character-driven choice. If the paladin says, I'm going to go stand in front to try to stop these monsters from hitting our wizards in the back, then I'm not going to roll randomly. They're more likely to hit the paladins than they are the other ones. But there are some monsters where it's ranged attacks and it doesn't matter, and they're going to roll randomly. So I almost always default to rolling randomly to determine who a monster is going to attack. Now, an interesting thing is I was looking at the game Dragonbane, and Dragonbane's monsters. So an interesting thing that I was looking at with Dragonbane is Dragonbane actually has random options when the monster goes. And here's a dragon, for example. A dragon's like a big one, and the dragon has a D6. You can roll a D6 to determine what they do, right? 4, tail strike. Dragon sweeps its spiked tail. 6, fire breath. And now they say specifically when you're running Dragonbane, you can choose instead. You could decide, the GM can decide what they do. But a lot of times they're rolling to determine what a monster does. It builds in this like the fake sort of artificial intelligence into the monsters that you're running, which is a really neat kind of way of running monsters that you don't know what the monster is going to do. Now, this one, it's a little different in that you're determining what a monster does, not who they're doing it to. I kind of flipped that around to say, I roll to see who a monster is going to attack. And I do this all the time, almost all the time, right? Only if there's a very specific reason, like this is a very smart monster. It's not going to use the charm attack on the elf because it knows that elves and charm don't work. Sometimes I do it anyway because I screw up. So it's a very interesting kind of, it's a very different approach. And I think it's a very different approach for other ones. But here are some advantages that this has. One is you don't know how things are going to go. If you're rolling randomly to determine what monster is attacking what character, you're kind of getting to watch what happens outside of everything else. The same is true with the players, that there's an element of chaos to what's going on in the battle that the players have to deal with too. Now, again, they could simply like move in the way, right, and try to set things up. And you could even ask them, like, are you trying to get in the way of this? Are you yelling at the monster? Are you drawing attention? Is there something you're trying to do? And then you could kind of twist it that way so that it kind of leans more. You might even say, instead of being purely random, I'm going to roll a d12, and on a 7 through 12, they're going after the paladin. On a 1 through 6, they're going through one of the other characters, right? And so you can kind of steer things even randomly then if there's some stochasticness to who they're going to attack. You could still roll dice even and then sway the odds towards one person or another. But a lot of times I just roll pure randomly to determine what's going on. And I really like it. The other advantage is it really separates and helps break down the adversarial GM impression. Even when you're a pretty open GM, I get this all the time. I've been playing with my players for years, in some cases decades, and I still get the like, you're doing X, Y, and Z. You're attacking my character, and it's like, no, I'm not attacking your character. I rolled randomly to determine who that character is getting hit by, and sometimes like the monster picks on a character. I have one player who's like, it seems like 3 times out of 6 it's attacking me, and I'm like, I'm literally rolling the die in front of you. You can see what the number is. And he's like, you're changing the numbers. I'm like, only because there are 2 people that are no longer here or they're hiding, and so obviously it's not going to attack them. And that's an element you have to do. If the rogue is hiding behind something, they're not going to attack the rogue. The rogue doesn't count. So when you're rolling randomly, you don't include the rogue. Stuff like that. But it breaks away from the idea that we are playing chess against the players. The players have to deal with the monsters that are in front of them. But we as GMs are now abstracted from the monsters themselves, which also means we care a little less, which means we're less worried when they get banished or they get dominated or they get charmed with hypnotic pattern. We kind of don't care as much because those monsters aren't us. The monsters are just another element of the game that's going on. And we are responsible for the larger world and for the smoothness of the game and for the pacing and the beats and these other aspects to it. And we're letting the dice determine what monsters are doing. So again, a very simple trick that I have been doing for a long time now. It's now just a core piece of what I'm doing. I noticed this because I was talking about the cipher system, in which you don't roll dice on the DM side, on the GM side in the cipher system. This is Monty Cook's, from Monty Cook Games' home style. And the truth is I roll dice all the time. And the things I'm rolling for are probabilities of monsters attacking one person or the other, or distance, or other aspects. But I'm rolling a lot of dice. I just don't roll attacks and damage, because you don't need to roll attacks and damage as a GM in Cypher. And instead I'm rolling dice for other things. And so that really works. But I think it's a really simple trick, and it's a simple trick that has multiple advantages to it, which is, it helps break away from adversarial GMing. It helps abstract you from the monsters, so you're less concerned about what happens to them. It adds a element to the game that means you get to kind of enjoy the game in a different way because you don't know what's going to happen. And the same is true for players, where it shakes up how players are interacting with the game and gives them a little bit more control over deciding like what they're going to do to whom, because they can do things like getting in the way. So that's my little trick. Roll for monster targeting. It's really simple. And it's a fun way to watch the game kind of evolve in front of you instead of you kind of predetermining what's going to happen. Every quarter on the Sly Flourish Patreon, we have the Patreon Q&A. Every month, a patron can ask an RPG-related question, and every week on Fridays, I answer all of the questions that have come up in the previous week. Some of those questions I bring here to the show so that we can dive into them a little deeper. Jonathan W. says, do you have any advice on things to include to address mid-campaign blues? My current campaign is 35 sessions in, and we have roughly 25 sessions to go to complete my homebrew adventure. We're at a point where the players are far enough into the story that the initial wave of enthusiasm is in the rearview mirror, far enough to know generally how to solve the big challenge, but far enough away that the end isn't in sight. This has happened in multiple campaigns I've run and played in, so I assume that this is true for others as well. Do you have any tips or tricks, perhaps certain types of encounters to include, or perhaps things to avoid the doldrums mid-campaign? Yeah, so there's a few things at play here, and one of them is that, like, the players, especially 35 sessions is a fair number. That is definitely like good, at least a year, right? And maybe or probably close to a year. And, the players have been playing their characters for a while. They've seen their characters grow. They're sort of in the characters. So even if you remove all of the other aspects of the campaign that could potentially give you sort of the doldrums, part of it is they've just been playing the same game for a long time. I have 2 games that are like this right now. Good news is we're at the tail end of both. So both of them, I think we're going to end within the next month or 2, and then we can move on. But some of it could just be like they've been sitting with that character for a long time, and maybe they're in the mood for another character. Now, if you have 25 sessions left to go, and you think that might be the problem, maybe you want to reduce those 25 sessions down, right? Maybe you want to kind of cut them back. But let's say that no, the players are still really into their characters and everything's going fine. You just kind of, they've hit this thing where they're not really learning anything new. They already know what the big bad threat is. And now's the time when you can really change things. So ideally, you haven't built your campaign so tightly that you can't have major changes in the campaign at this point that could really shake things up. And ideas of things that shake things up are like villains that they thought were villains turn out to not be villains anymore. Or there are other villains that you're dropping in. There are new fronts. There are new threats. There are new things that are happening here. And even if you have the main threat, like how has that been changing and evolving, right? Now that they're halfway through, at this point, probably if you have a main threat or a main villain, the main villain knows who the characters are. So what are they doing about that? But this is your opportunity to kind of shift things around. Ideally, not in a way that sort of ruins the agency of the players and the decisions that they've made, but more so to just kind of change the environment of what's going on. One of the reasons why I recommend having like 3 fronts or 3 major adversaries in a campaign is that gives a lot of room for those adversaries to shift and change and move and churn and lend itself an element of uncertainty in the campaign so that neither you nor the players know exactly where things are going to go over the next few sessions. So shaking things up that way is a big one. Like if you say that they already kind of know what's going on, well, now's the time to change the things that are going on, right? The world changes, the world evolves, right? Things are happening that are different now. If you run out of fronts, make some new ones. What are some new groups that are coming up? What are some new things that are happening? That's a trick. But I think like I've faced this where like I've been running my City of Arches game for almost more than a year, and the characters are now 16th level. They're about to get to 17th level really soon. And they, when they found out that they had to destroy the 3 the 3 soul vessels of the Nameless King, they were like, oh, great, 3 new quests, right? And it was like, they're kind of done with all I'm like, well, what else is there, right? Quests are what the game is about. But they're also like, oh man, like, we thought we were going to be done and now we got to do 3 more things, right? So there's definitely a little bit of that. But then you try to make each of those sections interesting. You try to, have new lore, have new shifts in the people that they're supporting and, turncoats and other aspects. But you want to be careful. You don't want to pull the final season of Game of Thrones where the thing that they were aiming for, you then pull the rug out from underneath them. Oh, it turns out it was this whole other thing this whole time, right? You definitely want to make sure that the choices that they've made thus far still matter, but there are new variables and new elements that they have to contend with and deal with. But then the other one is if you're really getting the point and like the overall people are just not as excited about the campaign, then maybe shrink those 25 sessions, bring it in, get it closer, have the villains show up, right? Have things speed up a bit so that they have that opportunity to like, maybe it's time, right? Maybe it's time to move on and bring in the rest of that. Like, you sound like you're a little bit more than halfway. But you could draw that in closer and bring things in. Cut anything you look at and you're like, that's kind of boring. Get rid of it and focus on what you think are the cool bits. So those would be my recommendations for how to kind of approach it. But a lot of it is what parts of it are beginning to feel boring. Is it the players with their characters, players with the story overall, and kind of address those things. Try to look at different ways to address those things. Justin Yu says, I feel like my players almost never use the treasure I give them. Before I ask them, what should I do about this? What could my players spend all of this gold on? It feels like a lot. So Justin, you got two problems. One, when we talk about treasure, I'm going to address it in two. And maybe you don't have this problem. Maybe you're just talking about treasure, just monetary treasure. One of the ones I really like is home base. Home bases is a money sink. Whether they have a mobile home base like an airship that they're able to fly around on, think your Final Fantasy airship style stuff, or an actual physical home base. You could even have a home base that they could transfer from place to place with planar magic. There is a bottomless well of things that you could spend money on for those home bases. As they get these home bases, there's magical enchantments, there's defense systems, there's the staff that they need to keep the thing going. And if they're sitting on a lot of money, you can sort of just put a cost associated with it on it. This was something that D&D 2024 tried to address with the Bastion system. The problem is they kind of lost track of what the Bastion system is supposed to do. It is not a money sink. In some cases, the Bastion makes money. That's not helping, right? Like the whole point is that the characters are able to buy things and spend their money on their Bastion, not generate a Bastion that makes more money. Like that, now what are they spending the money on? I don't think that's the case with all Bastion things, but I know that the Bastion definitely had some areas where it was like generating income rather than spending income. And the problem is that players will lean towards that. Like, hey, can we rent this out? Can we use this for other stuff? And they're going to try to turn it into a business. And then they're going to make more money, but you don't want to make money. You want it to be a money sink. So to me, the easiest one is to have a home base and have them use that. The other one is you can put in sort of a magic item thing. I talked about this in a previous one where essentially you can roll on a set of random magic items and then charge them, put them in a store that they could go buy, but it costs a lot. So if they have like certain magic items, they go, oh, that one's really good, but 30,000 gold. But go ahead and up those costs, right? Like, they're the supply. The supply is limited and then the demand could be high. So they can raise the prices on that. So buying and selling magic items are one. But I'm going to pick on another one, which is sometimes when we're talking about treasure, we're talking about magic items, that you're giving magic items out to players and they're not using that either. You don't have to worry about it. And actually, this is true with treasures too. If they don't care, you don't have to care. So if the players are just acquiring treasure and they're not spending it, that's fine. If they're complaining about the fact that there's nothing to spend it on, that's when you might want to put something in it that they could spend it on. Maybe they start to commission an airship, right? So they can get around. Maybe they commission a new home base or they build up a castle. You could also have it that they spend the money on some of the things that are helping the campaign go. So maybe they are able to take the money that they bring and help build up the defenses of the city they're trying to defend from the hordes that are attacking it. Maybe they're sending out expeditions to go handle quests that they don't want to handle so they can go off, but it costs a lot of money to finance those groups so that they'll go and they'll do it. So there's lots of things you could do like that, but only if it's a problem for your players. If they don't care, you don't have to care. So a lot of times a common complaint I hear is, hey, I give out all of these like scrolls and potions and single-use magic items that, have one spell effect on them and they don't use them. And my opinion is I don't care. Like if they've got them and they're not using them, that's on them. Right? I don't think it ruins their fun to not use it. I think people have a tendency to hoard those kind of things. And so what? I hoard, look at every computer role-playing game I've ever played. I've ended the game with bags of stuff I've never used. Baldur's Gate 3, bags of stuff I've never used. Tons and tons of super powerful things that I never touched because I was like, oh, it's limited. I'm going to wait until I need it. Well, then I've won the game and I never needed it. Fine, right? I still enjoyed Baldur's Gate 3. It didn't really matter, right? So I really feel like the best time for treasure is when they get it, right? That from it's important that a GM give treasure to players and to characters. But after that, I think that their part of it is kind of done. So I don't think you need to worry about giving out treasure that much. So, you could ask your players for it. And I gave you a few options, but the other part is, you don't have to be hard on yourself either. That like, if the players are happy getting the treasure, that's all you really need to worry about. Friends, I want to thank all of you for hanging out with me today while we talked about all things in tabletop role-playing games. If you enjoyed this show and you want more stuff like this, please consider subscribing to the Sly Flourish newsletter. It is absolutely free to sign up. You can find a link down in the show notes. You get a free adventure generator PDF, and you get a weekly RPG-related article with links to all of the other work that I do. You can also join me on Patreon. Patrons get access to all kinds of tips, tricks, tools, access to our awesome community over on our Discord server. Hero tier subscribers get access to readings and reflections. and a whole bunch of new City of Arches scenarios that I've been developing. You get tons of stuff for being a patron of Sly Flourish. It's a really fantastic deal. And you can pick up any of my books, including Return to the Lazy Dungeon Master, Lazy DM's Companion, Forge of Foes, City of Arches, and more at the Sly Flourish bookstore. Links for all that in their show notes. Thank you so much. Have a great day, and get out there and play an RPG.